Good afternoon. My name is Tom Lawrence. Welcome to the second in the Clarendon Lecture Series of 2025. I'm only going to speak for a moment. I just want to thank you all for coming. I want to thank Mette Morsing for hosting the panel she's going to introduce in a moment. She's very kindly accepted to do this. She's the director of the Smith School of Enterprise and Environment, and I'll let things go on from there. Just in case you weren't at the first lecture series or you don't know about it, the Clarendon Lectures are a joint effort of Oxford University Press and Ivey Business School. And so I just want to say thanks to Oxford University Press and to the help at the Ivey Business School, particularly Christina and Tiffany, who've been really organizing the entire thing. We have a panel for the evening. Mette Morsing is your host. I'll get out of the way.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming here tonight. And today I have the honor of moderating us through the next hour. And this will be both very, very exciting, and it will also be very, very easy. Because I have here on the stage an amazing keynote and an amazing panel. And yes, I've been really looking forward to today because we have 4 brilliant speakers, all with global experience from research, education, and practice in the space of the most urgent challenges we face today on Earth. And we have a theme here today that is becoming even more urgent every day, namely new models for systems issues. And as you will know, this is the second, as Tom already said, this is the second lecture in the series of 3 of the Clarendon lectures. And the first was also about designing the future, focus on systems thinking for resilient, prosperous, and sustainable organizations and systems. And this was more, Tima, I think it's fair to say, in the traditional format, a lecture, a true world-class lecture that we all enjoyed. So this second lecture, we are experimenting a bit. We are namely engaging in the debate with a panel. And what we will discuss here today is still under the theme of designing the future, and it's new models of scholarship for systems issues. And the basic spirit for this panel and these panelists is that systems issues challenge traditional approaches to management research. And I think it's fair to say that all keynote and all panelists are systems researchers and bring very different experiences and very different approaches to us here today. So we will discuss how do we design, how do we conduct research that intersect with practice and across disciplines to approach systems issues. And the conversation will focus on, I think it's fair to say, paradigm shifting approaches for us as scholars to address systems issues. And this is not for the faint-hearted researcher, because it not only demands theory development as we know it, but it also demands a shift in the way we do research, our methods, the way we approach data collection and analysis, and how we, in turn, engage with practice. So systems issues call for system research, and our brilliant panelists here today will bring that on for us. And I'll introduce the keynote and the panelists in a moment, but let me just take a few seconds here to tell you how we have planned the ongoing here for the next hour. So Tima will start a few minutes introducing the problem and how we as organizations and scholars work or not with systems approaches and what is our current system approach. Then each of the 3 panelists will have a short introduction on their ways, their experiences, and their learnings working with systems approaches. Then back to you, Tima, and a reflection from Tima on what we have heard from the panelists and reflections on these approaches and how they help us address the problem in different ways. Then I will invite you, and so please be prepared, I will invite you to ask questions to the panelists, engaging with them on their systems approaches, and I would love to have as many comments as we know, comments from the audience, also bring important issues and reflections to the debate as it goes. So let me first introduce Tima Bansal. Tima, you are the Professor of Sustainability and Strategy at Ivey Business School in Canada. For those of you who don't know Tima, I don't think that is many in this room. And Tima, your expertise is strategy, sustainability, systems, and innovation, truly at the core of the Clarendon lectures here this year. And you've been engaged in this stream of research, I think it's fair to say, long before it became mainstream, even at the time where it was questioned, is this really a subject matter for management research? You took that on and inspired a lot of us all over the world. You published in some of the top management research journals, but also, and I have a lot of admiration for that, you have also engaged in the popular press, The Guardian, Wall Street Journal, and you also have your own column in Forbes. You have also engaged with practice. And you lead Innovation North, which is about reimagining business innovation to create better businesses. You have also founded the Network for Business Sustainability, where many of us have engaged as scholars and follow the network, and that as a source of inspiration, and also for the Ivey Center for Building Sustainable Value. You also chair the Impact Committee for Venture Capitalist Shift for Good, and you are also, importantly, the chair of the board of the United Nations for Principles for Responsible Management Education. In fact, you were my boss at some time, you know. You were my boss because you were the chair and I was the director. I was the head of the UN's Principles for Responsible Management Education. So I served you, I worked under you, I enjoyed every moment, and we had a lot of fun and a lot of challenges and a lot of amazing results, I think it's fair to say, when we worked together, and you're still doing that. Finally, yes, she is an alumni of Oxford. Richard Barker, you're Professor of Accounting here at Said Business School, and you're also currently courageously on leave for a period, actually for 4 years from Said, as you are the full-time member of the International Sustainability Standards Board, ISSB. It's a role that combines your own research, your long-standing research interests and policy experience across corporate reporting and sustainability, holding companies accountable for their engagement with society and the planet. And previously you have been Deputy Dean at the Business School here, you've been Chair of the Expert Panel of Accounting for Sustainability, and member of the UK's Corporate Reporting Council. So wonderful to have your experience here with us today and what you are engaging with right now. Eva Brophy, you hold a joint appointment between the Smith School of Enterprise and the Environment, where I am the director, and Said Business School. And this is something we really welcome at the Smith School, sort of bridging across units within the university. And you are a co-investigator of Oxford Net Zero, and you work closely with the engagement team, developing a range of action research projects to drive ambitious climate action. You also lead the Business Model Workstream Core, which is an Oxford-led interdisciplinary consortium focusing on evaluating economically, socially, and environmentally scalable carbon dioxide removal options. And you're also the co-founder of the Sustainable and Inclusive Innovation Africa initiative, so you also bring that perspective here to us today. And finally, Jessica Omokuchi, you are a research fellow on the Inclusive Net Zero for the Oxford Net Zero Initiative, and you're based at the Institute of Science, Innovation and Society, INSIS, here at Oxford. So again, an example of a scholar who bridges across units within the university. And your research critically examines whether and how the net zero concept enables greater equity and justice in climate action by state and non-state actors in emerging economies and developing countries. And you have also been a member of the United Nations Secretary General's high-level expert group on credibility and accountability of net zero by non-state actors. And you are also, bring a lot of experience from your work in practice with NGO, working with climate, finance, and adaptation in that space. So, as gentlemen and ladies, as you can see, we have a superstar panel here today. And again, please prepare yourself for bringing some good questions to engage with the panel. Now, please, Tima, over to you to start us off here.
Thank you, Meta. That was an amazing introduction. I have to say, of the 3 lectures, this is my favorite because I get to do less of the talking and get to listen to 3 amazing panelists. What I was asked to do is just to review briefly what I talked about last time, and then that will set the stage for this conversation that will come. And what I did last time was review what I thought a synthesis of the research that motivated where I am right now. And what I think the panelists will do amazingly well is to make the ideas concrete. So where I started was last time saying that I'm a business strategy scholar in a business school, and we draw heavily on economic models. But I argued that economic models are deeply flawed. And that's because in an interconnected world, it is very difficult to make the economic models predictable, allow us to control and predict what will happen. So I suggested that there's several flaws with this. One is interdependence. When you have interdependent variables and interdependent data points, causality goes out the door. And so interdependence is, if you can imagine, when you get up in the morning, what is the cause of you getting up in the morning? 30% of your cells are activated when you get up in the morning. There is no cause. There's a bunch of variables that play into the effect of getting up. So causality, when you have interconnected variables, doesn't make any sense. And yet we assume in economic modeling that there's independent variables. So if you're going to have a set of independent variables and dependent variable, it just falls apart when you have an interconnected world. I also suggested that in a world that we're seeing such dramatic changes so quickly that these economic models are based on past data also don't have much relevance. I don't know what model will tell me what will happen to tariffs in the next month. And I don't think anybody could predict that. The other thing about economic models is that there's no natural resource limits. They were devised in a time when economic models didn't really even think about natural resource limits. And so they have open models that you optimize. And yet in a world in which there's natural resource limits, there's no way to model that other than to give natural resources a price. Does that mean we give a price to the last whale or the last tree? That's a problem. And then finally, I talked about levels of analysis. That is also a problem with a lot of modeling. That as you shift from levels of analysis, then what you assume in economic models is that what applies to the macro level will also apply to the individual. So economists might assume at the macro level that people are rational, self-interested, and opportunistic to allow their models to clear. But that does not mean, as we do in business schools and strategy, require us to assume that every individual is self-interested, rational, and opportunistic. And that becomes a leap in logic that we make in business schools. So I question the economic models that are at the heart of strategy. I suggested that we need systems thinking. And systems thinking has been around for decades. So the question is, why don't we use it more? And I suggested that there's 2 types of systems thinking. One is analytical, hard systems thinking. That is very much like economic modeling. It's like systems dynamics. And that's not used because it falls into the same flaws as does economic modeling. And then there's soft systems modeling. And soft systems are a lot of the ideas that we do with stakeholder consultations, et cetera, but there's so many of them. So they're practically relevant, they're used in practice, but they're not academically rigorous. So where I left the talk last time is a call for analytically rigorous, managerially relevant systems models so that they don't become too hard, too slow, and too unpredictable, that we can actually tackle those issues that systems modeling has had in the past, or systems thinking has had in the past. That's where I left things. And so now we get to hear about practical ways in which we are developing this notion of academically rigorous, managerially relevant systems thinking.
Thank you very much, Tima. Thank you very much for taking it on for us. And Jessica, you promised to go first. Please.
Yeah. Can you hear me? Okay. Thanks, Meta. I will talk about how the work we do embeds systems thinking, and I'll start by talking about the work, what we do, why it's important, and some of the lessons that we've learned from that. And so I am part of a team that's called Oxford Net Zero, as Meta said earlier. And I'm part of a team that is quite interdisciplinary. We have people who work from the Department of Physics. We have people from the Department of Zoology, the Ivey Business School here. We have people from the Blavatnik. And so we have people looking at net zero from different angles, from governance, from nature-based solutions. I'm part of a team that is based in the Department of Anthropology, and I look at net zero from an inclusive angle. And so one thing that we learned earlier when I started this job was that net zero as a framework for climate action is framed around knowledge that is created in Europe or the Americas, that is developed in developed countries, where whatever we think net zero is something that is considered to be cross-cutting across all worlds. And so if you develop something in Europe that you expect to be applied in Africa or in Asia, then you're missing a point there, you're missing the practicality of it. And so what we decided to do was to generate research that was much more place-based, that was informed by the realities of the places that we expect net zero to be implemented in. And so my job is to think about net zero in the global south. And I do this by doing research, by doing research that looks at what does net zero mean within these contexts, and how can we get net zero to work better? How can we get it to align with the needs of these countries and these localities? So basically what we do is challenge existing narratives about net zero in developing countries and present alternative narratives, alternative pathways towards transitioning towards net zero. Why is this important? It's quite clear that challenging these existing narratives and presenting alternative pathways towards net zero, of what net zero should be, is quite important, because it enables us to think about net zero much more practically. It enables us to create ambition for net zero that is much more rooted in capacities and priorities of these developing countries. We also create research that reflects the reality of these places, of climate change in developing countries. But more importantly, we make ambitious climate action much more practical, much more achievable. Because when we know what net zero means in a country like Namibia, then we know that any ambition, any commitment that will come from Namibia will be much more practical and much more applicable and much more achievable within those contexts. But our work is not just research. We also work to ensure that our research engages with practice, with policy, and so we inform practice in these regions to generate direct and quick impact. And to do that, we ensure that those who make local, institutional, national, and international decisions are involved in the work that we do. And we therefore use research methods and tools that both engage with researchers, but also that engage with these members of this system, but also ensure that we collect the data that is relevant to those questions that we're asking. And so, for example, we use workshops to not just collect data, but also to engage with these groups of people. We also use other research tools such as focus group discussions that are much more two-way conversations as opposed to one-way conversation where you just asking the questions and getting the answers. We also publish our work in journals that emphasize the research and practice aspect of our work. And so, for example, we have journals that will ask you to demonstrate what is the practice implication of this work. And so before you publish that research, you have to actually think quite critically about what contribution you're making to practice. And additionally, we also make sure that some of the work that we produce uses alternative outputs, for example, reports, policy briefs, so that we can make them available to publications. But these publications are available to populations outside of the core the core group that we talked about, the Europe and the Americas, because we know that people outside of these regions have difficulties accessing peer-reviewed articles, and so reports are the best ways to reach to them. And then lastly, what have we learned from this work? One is that whoever you include when you're studying a system determines your output. And so when you decide to go narrow when you're thinking about a system, means that you'll get very narrow results, but also you'll get very narrow impact in terms of practice. And so when you're drawing boundaries around how big your system should look, you should think about how much of influence do I need to have on the system. And secondly is that because net zero is a very rapidly evolving concept. We do very rapid research. We don't have time to do research that spans 6 years or 3 or even 4 years. And so we do very rapid research that looks at a question and that looks at an issue and engages with different groups of people within a system, but also that ensures that we generate, as I said, we generate the practice impact that we expect. And then when you're done with that, you move on to the next issue, because net zero is it's quickly evolving, and we need to make sure that the global South catches up with the rest of the world in terms of practice. And so doing this quite rapidly ensures that we are kind of on top of the most pressing issues in these regions. But also, lastly, one of the lessons that, the third lesson that we've learned is that it's quite resource intensive to conduct very rapid research in a system that is very, very much populated. And so we spend a lot of hours strategizing about the research that we do, but we also spend a lot of money, financial and human resources, in thinking about where do we focus on, what do we focus on, and how do we engage with these different components of the system. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so very much, Jessica. Please, Eva.
Great, thanks very much, and lovely to see everybody. And I'm going to pick up from Jessica's lessons, actually, particularly this tension, I think, that we see in business schools to be able to do the kind of rapid research that we really need when we're talking about systems problems. And when I was thinking about this, I was going to focus on one project, but then I decided, actually, I think it's important to me to think about the journey that I've taken to be able to do this kind of work, particularly in a business school at the intersection with another department. And I've always been drawn to looking at systems problems that are in some way connected to net zero and sustainable development. And I have many different projects that look at the interdependence between different types of systems problems. My first big project when I came to Oxford was funded by the ESRC, and it was focused on energy access in sub-Saharan Africa. And I kind of identify myself, I've changed how I identify myself, but I identify myself now as an innovation and entrepreneurship scholar. As an entrepreneurship scholar, it was important for me that we had a focus on entrepreneurs in that project. So we needed to understand the innovative approaches that different companies were developing to be able to address energy access in ways that were clean, so focused on environmentally responsible approaches, we might say, and also enabled poverty reduction, right? Given the context that we were studying. But we couldn't really look at those entrepreneurs in isolation. If we're interested in a problem like energy access, and we can even frame the problem in very different ways, it's not just about energy access, it's about climate, it's about adaptation, it's about poverty reduction and income generation. To be able to say something useful in terms of addressing that problem, we needed to engage with the many other actors that are supporting entrepreneurs or hindering those entrepreneurs from developing these types of solutions. And ultimately, as a scholar, I want my knowledge, yes, to contribute to theory, but I also want it to leverage the power of the private sector to be able to address these types of complex challenges. And that's always what's kind of driven me in my career. Doing this kind of work, and this kind of comes back to what Jessica is saying, it's really challenging because there's so many different things that you need to do if you're engaging in the messiness and the complexity, and you're studying the entrepreneurs, but in our case we needed to study the policies, and we needed to engage with communities, and we collected data on all of these different aspects of the problem across multiple countries, and we were trying to do it in 18 months, and basically we just overextended ourselves completely. We were also trying to do convening at the same time, we were bringing together stakeholders stakeholders, connecting different types of groups, connecting entrepreneurs and policymakers. And it was really exciting work, but I have since learned that, and I'll come to the lessons at the very end, that there are other approaches to being able to do that work in a way that is going to accelerate impact. So once I had this first main project, I decided actually what I need to do, I think, is to embed myself in interdisciplinary projects in the university, not to lead a project and not to try to do everything by myself. And that's how I came to be embedded in CORE, which is the Greenhouse Gas Removal Hub led by the Smith School, where I lead the work on business models and entrepreneurship. And what makes that different is the fact that I am learning about the complexity of the systems problems from experts who understand the different facets of those problems. I don't need to look at things from scratch. I'm part of the meetings. I get exposed to all of the different things that are happening on the ground, happening quickly in the policy world with entrepreneurs. So I get that exposure through experts that are working across economics, the legal experts that we have looking at different aspects of governing the emerging carbon removal sector. And then at the same time, the project has a huge engagement team. These people are experts in engaging with different types of communities, bringing those stakeholders together, creating opportunities for impact. So, for example, at the moment we're working with the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero, and that was something that came out of the convening that the engagement team was able to do. And we also use that as an opportunity to collect data and inform our research, but also do research on some of the processes as they're happening. And that's also the model that I use for working with the Oxford Net Zero engagement team. So the superstars, Kaya is here. I don't know if others from the Oxford Net Zero engagement team are in the room, Matilda and Alexis. The model is very similar there. They are so skilled at being able to engage with businesses, with civil society organizations, with governments. They have lots of organizations coming to them to try to help solve specific problems. And then I help them to try to figure out ways that we can also do research, different types of research with different types of outputs, some more long-term, right? And this goes back to Jessica's point. Because I straddle the business school, it's important for me also to do different kinds of research, not only rapid outputs, but thinking in ways that can develop theory in different ways. And one of the ways that I try to do that is by working with experts in engagement in Oxford Net Zero and CORE. So that's kind of, my journey has shifted from trying to do everything on my own to now kind of embedding myself in these wonderful teams. And I think what I've learned from that process is three things. The first is it's really all about community and relationships. I thought initially that I could kind of set up this project, that I could lead something that was going to enable me to have the impact that I wanted to have. And I think actually in this work, it's important often to let go of that ego and to say, this is a space that requires much more collaborative work, and we need different models, and there's a time and a place for kind of moving into and creating new things, but actually we have infrastructure to be able to work together in much more distributed ways, and I think we need to do an awful lot more of that. It also requires different types of networks. So I work with people who are skilled at publishing in interdisciplinary journals, like Jessica was mentioning, but I also work with experts in the business school who are really skilled at developing theoretical contributions for top management journals. And you need to have both of those networks, which is really fun to be able to work with lots of different people, but it's also complex to manage. The second thing is, even though it's all about community and relationships, you need to be able to not lose sight of yourself in all of this. And I think that's difficult in doing this kind of systems work because it's so messy, because it's so complex, because you need all these different relationships. And I think it's important that we step back and think about yourself in all of this and advocating for yourself, because our institutions need to change in many ways to be able to enable these types of positions to be more prevalent that are across different departments, and that comes with extra work, and we need to look after ourselves as we're doing that. And then finally, and this is just very personal, I need to connect to something bigger in the work that I do. For me, that's about connecting to nature. Many of you know that I love being preferably in or near water, and that's my way of connecting to something that goes beyond it connects me to a bigger system, right? It makes me realize how interconnected we all are through our enjoyment of nature and other beautiful resources that this world offers us, and we're so poor at protecting. So yes, those are my 3 lessons, and I'm looking forward to the conversation afterwards.
Thank you, Aoife. So let me bring an example from the policy world, something that I'm working on right now. And just by way of background, just for those who are not familiar with the International Sustainability Standards Board, the ISSB is a part of the IFRS, International Financial Reporting Standards Foundation. There are 2 boards. One board sets accounting standards, the other one, which is mine, sets sustainability standards. The accounting standards are used in more than 140 countries around the world. So that's the global norm for reporting on financial performance. The IFRS Foundation created a sustainability board in response to, not directly, but in effect in response to the issues that some of the issues Tima raised at the beginning. So financial accounting is useful information if the past is a good guide to the future, because accounting tells you about the past. And if in a world of sustainability and transition and so on, the past is not a good guide to the future, accounting becomes less important, actually. The other broad issue is one of planetary boundaries and physical constraints and so on that sustainability brings into the frame. You can't assume business will continue to operate as it always has operated, and that there will always be resources available and the planet won't warm up and so on. So because of the finite nature of the resources available, because of the rate of economic growth and so on, again, the past is not a good guide to the future. So the demand was for sustainability-related standards that helped investors to understand how the world is changing, and therefore how to think about the future of the companies they're invested in. However, the context here is not systems level, it's individual level. So in a sense, the standards were introduced to address a systems level problem, but the standards are for individual companies to report to their investors about the value of the individual company. And that's a profound constraint. So the example I wanted to bring is around transition plans, which some of you around the room will be very familiar with, but let me just explain what they are. The idea is you have a 1.5 degree Paris target, not much of a target these days as it happens, but anyway, you have a target for net zero, and you have a transition plan. So it's one thing to have a target. It's another thing to say, here's how we're going to get from where we are now to meet the target in 2030, 40, 50, whatever it is. So a transition plan, by its nature, is a sort of high-level ambition, as it were, to mitigate. Here is a definition of a transition plan from the Transition Plan Task Force, which was set up by the UK government. There was a lot of Oxford involvement in that process, by the way, in that work. They define a transition plan as a strategy outlining how an organisation will adapt its business model and operations to align with climate-related goals, such as achieving net zero. Okay, so how do we make sure that every individual entity's actions all add up collectively to achieve net zero in aggregate? Now, in our ISSB's climate standard, which was issued in 2023, we also define transition plan, and our definition is an entity's strategy and planned actions to manage its transition towards a lower carbon economy, which sounds like it's the same kind of definition. It sounds like it's trying to say much the same thing. But notice the use of the word its, right? The entity's strategy to manage its transition. So the issue here is not, the job of the entity, if you think about the institutional constraints on the corporation, it's not the job of a company to achieve net zero. It's not a job of an individual corporation to achieve a public policy target. And our standards don't require them, therefore, to do that. Our standards say the world is transitioning towards net zero, arguably. You can take your own view on that. What are you doing about it? So the disclosure becomes, how is the entity adapting to a world in which there are systemic constraints? So transition plan in that context doesn't mean how is the entity contributing to society's systemic problem of mitigating climate change. It becomes, given that climate change is happening and given that the system is changing, what is the entity doing to look after itself? And so the same word takes on a fundamentally different meaning, even though to most actors in the space, actually that difference is not seen. People just talk about transition plans as if it's the same thing. So the very real policy issue is we have taken on the work of the UK's Transition Plan Task Force, and we are due to produce educational materials on here's how you do a transition plan. And we have not yet resolved, in my mind, that fundamental issue, well, actually, of what are we expecting companies to do, what does it look like? So I think what you have, so this is a question rather than a learning experience and answers. The question is, in effect, is how do you reconcile an individual entity institutional structure, which is what we have in corporate reporting and the way we think about capital markets and so on, with a system-level challenge. I think at the very least, you have to make a distinction between what does transition plan mean at systems level and what does it mean for the individual corporation. By identifying the difference between the two, if you aggregate all the corporate transition plans, by the way, you get to about 2.7 degrees is sort of current corporate planning. So it's clearly not in the collective best interest, right? So I think by not conflating the two, you get the difference between the two. By getting the difference between the two, you start to be able to address the problem. But I don't know how to do it. On that point, Tima.
Okay, I get the really difficult task of trying to pull out some common themes from this. Yeah, I don't know if I'll succeed or not, but I'm going to give this a go. First of all, I think that we need to define what is a system. And I think that that wasn't necessarily overt, and yet it was really clear that they were all talking about systems. I think that the one thing that ties us all together is that we care about the macro system. So we care about net zero, about climate, about poverty was mentioned, all of these big systems issues. And then we think about the actors in the system. And so we are individuals and actors in this larger system. So if the larger system is actually what ties us together, I have to say that one thing that I definitely heard in all of this was a lot of excitement about this issue, and that we're somewhat frustrated with the tools that we have right now to deal with actors dealing with these big issues. And so each of us, I think, are trying to understand how to move that forward. So the other thing I heard is that the macro system, this is the climate system, the institutions in which we operate, or whatever it might be, those are constraining. Those are the ones that often set the rules. Those are the ones that we have to adapt to. But then we're actors within that larger system that shape that system. I also heard that as well. And so whether it's the standards boards, and we're talking about corporations that are meeting the standards, but of the institution that is also setting the standards, or whether it's climate that's affecting us, and we have to then adapt to. So that level or scales are really important. The other thing, though, that's related to that is I also heard about agency, and that we as actors, at least I heard this, that we all have active agency as either individuals or organizations. So we change the system changes us. I think one of the coolest things, though, is that this question of theory. Now, who here is a business school person? Most of us, right? And so if you're a researcher, you know that theory is what grounds us. Theory is what makes us I know, good at what we do, right? And it's the currency of success. And yet, what I also heard here was this challenge, this difficulty of finding theories within systems work. Because what is a theory of systems? But then take that one step further. Maybe it's not theory that's important in systems. What I really heard loudly was that it was the methods that become important. And so it was the tools of engagement. It was the tools of how you interact and collect data, how you map, how you build standards, how you engage. So I feel like the tools may be more interesting, but then also the data become really important. Place-based data becomes really important. But I'm going to take this now in a related step. I also heard about the skills, the research skills that are needed to do this type of work was really interesting to me. So this deep engagement with the context became important in all three of the talks. So you have to be able to not just look at data, you have to be able to understand and read and feel and sense the system, which requires researchers to do something different than I think that what we're often taught to do. And so I think systems thinking requires new academic skills. Quite honestly, I'm not sure if we teach that in our methods courses. And then this new form of research, which is rapid research, which is about impact in the moment, not through the publications. And now we have all probably had this moment of distress when we realize that only 6 people have cited us and we spent 4 years on that publication. And we're starting to say, well, maybe that's not what matters. Maybe it's the systems work that we're doing in real time that matters. And so I think that was really cool about the rapid research and this ability to talk across boundaries. So then that raises a couple of questions, though. I've sort of seeded them already. I think we have to talk about this theory fetish that we have, and that maybe theory isn't necessarily where we want to go, that if we are looking at a complex system, we have to think about the system in real time. So what is theory in our world? Does it even matter? And then the other one is, who is our audience? Is it us that we're communicating what the system is about, or is the audience the people that we're actually engaging with in the system at that moment? Anyway, I think that those are some of the observations.
Oh, thank you so much, Tima. Thank you very much for taking on that indeed challenging task. I think you did brilliantly in sort of summing up some of the main things that cuts across the presentations here and the experiences. And I do think that the idea about, I think the challenge also to what some of us are engaged with in theory performativity, how our theories actually perform the way that we engage with the world. And I think we've heard that from, talks about the system level, the individual level, the interdisciplinarity needed, and also the north-south perspectives that make the world look very, very different, and the theories look very different and bring different knowledge to us. I would like to ask, before I open up for the audience, for you to engage with your questions here, also to ask you about, so we all agree that systems approaches are needed to study systems issues, and also that you come with your experiences, but we also don't see enough of this. We've discussed that as we were preparing for this conversation here. So what do you think we should, how can we have more of the kind of research we are discussing here, more of these systems approaches to actually address with systems issues? And I would like to ask any of you in the panel if you would like to how do we overcome these barriers? I can say from the Smith School perspective, and got you up here, Kaya, sort of what I see here at the Smith School is an interdisciplinary unit within the university, spanning across all our divisions, across all the sciences, engineering, natural sciences, the humanities and social sciences. And you will see people, and I have to say I'm really impressed, and I've only been here 1.5 years, so I didn't invent this school, but I'm impressed to see how scholars coming from the space or the theories of economics, the space of law, the space of engineering science, publishing together, not just doing the data collection, but also actually publishing together. But you can't publish in any journal on this kind of research because not all journals appreciate these three types of knowledges brought together in some kind of new knowledge generation publication. So what I see is there are particularly 2 journals in our space that accepts, invites, encourages. That's where we publish this kind of research. And that's Nature and the Nature journals, the Nature family, and it's Science. And these journals, I think it's fair to say, we have every second week from the Smith School a publication in one of these journals over the past year. And this is something that I think is very inspiring for me coming as a management scholar to the Smith School and seeing it's actually happening. It doesn't happen by itself. It takes a lot of nurturing and a lot of, as you have also said, a lot of excitement and additional engagement. But I would like to invite you for reflections on what more do we need? Again, now we are in a business school. What would we? Could we stimulate more of this kind of research? Eva.
Yeah, I can start. I think so. I think the model at the Smith School works really, really well. But then it's difficult in a business school to have that kind of work as part of your portfolio and have it as a legitimate part of your portfolio still. And I'm talking about many business schools. And so I think there needs to be some sort of change, at least in the way that work is valued in business schools. And I think we need to be doing both. I think we need to be doing the work that engages with theories. It's deep work that takes a lot of time, but it helps us to reflect and to be able to see patterns that I don't think we see as clearly when we're doing kind of rapid iterations. So I would say we need both of those things. And I think we need to have the incentives in place so that we have business school people also involved in these interdisciplinary projects. It's not, people used to think I was mad doing this. Like when I would tell people in the beginning what I wanted to do and how I wanted to be involved in these projects, a lot of the advice or the questions that I was given was, like, this is not really, like, how does this fit, right? How does it fit in a business school? And, it's slowed me down in my career, I think, as a result. And so I think we have to be kind of acknowledging the fact that incentives in some ways need to change, and we need to be pushing and kind of, goes back to your agency point, right? We do have agency, but we also come up against some of these structures, and we need to kind of be working together to fix that.
Thank you, Eva, for that comment. Anyone want to ask a question? Yes, please.
Yeah, thanks so much for this panel.
We have, could you please say your name and your affiliation? Thank you.
Sure, yeah, my name's Clara Cecil. I'm a student in the Sustainability Enterprise and the Environment program at the Smith School. It's been a really wonderful panel discussion. I think in addition to the fetishes around theories that you were talking about, there's also an obsession with standards. And like Jessica observed early on, sometimes those standards aren't applicable and can actually be stifling for the organizations that are trying to innovate or are trying to actually do work to get towards net zero. So I'm curious to hear a little bit more about kind of that tension as you see it, and where there's opportunities to use the standards as a guide, but potentially loosen the reins a little bit and rely a little bit less on externally facing standards like the omnibus.
Thank you for this brilliant question. I think it points in a particular direction.
The case for the defence. So companies say that kind of thing a lot. A company's job is not to get to net zero. A company's job is not to address biodiversity, etc. And so relying on what companies say about what they're doing to address these systemic issues that's not going to be enough by itself, right? So you have to understand, I think, that the economic incentives that corporations face in the capital market structure and so on, And if you want to change those, you have to, if you want to change corporate behavior so that the system and the individual are not so misaligned, you have to change the economic incentives of the corporation. And that's very hard to do in the absence of transparent comparability between the actions of different corporations. So individual entities each doing their own thing, I think, doesn't get you very far.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Thanks. I think following on from that.
Maybe mention your name.
Oh, hi. I'm Kaya Axelson. I work with Oxford Net Zero and everyone on the panel, which is such a delight. Thank you so much for coming. It's a pleasure to meet you. One of the papers that I've been really taking inspiration from in my most recent work on corporate policy engagement is your paper on corporate social responsibility needs corporate political responsibility. And we're in a very tough time for that right now. We're just sort of getting our heads around that in the standards space, understanding that there are these external dependencies and transition plans. Companies can't meet net zero without engaging in policy. We've known this for a long time, and yet we haven't tracked corporate political engagement, and they've kind of got ahead of us on the other side on that. So what can we do in this moment to engage on how companies work with the entire system and to track that better so that we can even go above and beyond the standards into the kind of policy environment that's needed to drive all this change?
Thank you for this question. Would you like to pick up? Yes, please.
I don't have an answer. That's a really great question. And I think that you've said this already, but there's this really fine line by engaging in policy in a way that's productive for the bigger system. And then there's engaging in policy that's better for the individual actors. And I think that we're seeing that tilt right now, that it's better for the individual actors because the market system is still the dominant logic. And I really don't know if, so I think that we need strong institutions. Ultimately, if a system is going to work, then I think Richard said this really well, is that if a system is to work, then that means that we have to have these macro level actors that are looking after the macro level concerns, because the individuals will always look after their individual concerns. So what's happening is this tilt that the individuals are gaining the power, and even the consortiums, to change the macro level systems, to erode some of those institutions, to favor their own interests. So I don't really have an answer about what we should do. I think that as a good academic, I can analyze, but I can't advise.
Thank you, Tima. We have a question here, and we have a question over there.
Hi, I'm Fatima. I'm a lecturer at the University of Bristol Business School. And I have a question, speaking to the audience of the business school. In my view, students are part of that audience, right? So my question is, I guess for all of you, from your learnings of engaging with these systemic issues, challenges, how has that impacted your teaching practice? Or if you are not directly teaching, how is that being incorporated into what you are teaching students? Especially, I will say, undergraduate students, master's students that don't necessarily have the experience with the industry, or they have not seen these issues themselves beyond from what they read on the news or what they might hear from someone else. So they don't have the experience to shape their views. It's just what we tell them in the classroom. So how have you taken this learning to shape what you are teaching to your students? And we hear about incorporating systems thinking and interdisciplinarity, but how do you do it?
Just take two more questions and then ask the panel to reflect. Thank you for a brilliant question about educational practices. How does this sort of become mirrored into what we teach in the classroom, or how we teach in the classroom? And there is one more question from over there, and then over here, yeah.
Thank you, Laura Spence from King's College London. Thank you, it was really inspiring. I was hearing the word boundary come up a lot, and then Tima went to it straight away. Each of you are navigating across some pretty challenging boundaries. And I really am interested in how we seek to address navigating across boundaries in ways other than the sort of structural ways which are comfortable within a systems thinking, and I think we've all of you referred to, but thinking more about the cultural challenges around norms and values and perhaps especially language, and what your experiences have been in trying to really engage with those softer cultural perspectives.
Brilliant question as well. Boundaries, softer, cultural, social. And then we have a question behind you, Tom, over here. Yeah. And Tom, you are helping me with the online, so maybe we have a couple of those also. Thank you, please.
Thank you. This was a fabulous panel discussion. So my question is to Tima, like, if you consider that, so I'm Nauman Asghar, I'm an assistant professor in strategy at University of Liverpool Management School. So my question is, if we scholars in strategy are using less of systems approach, is this because of some normative view about how strategy research should be done, or is it because of intractability of using this approach? I mean, we use economic models or those kind of approaches because they may make some research questions tractable. So is there an inherent trade-off between analytical rigor and that we expect and the kind of approach that we want to use through systems thinking? Or if we want to use systems thinking, maybe we should just give up on that rigor and we should not even think of that. So that is one question. And second one is that, like, especially more practical one, like when PhD students come, they have to finish their research in 4 to 5 years. And so do you have some kind of guidelines in which, like, what kind of methodology they can use while adopting this approach? Or are you more agnostic as to the methodology? Thank you.
Thank you so much. So thank you very much for this question. So education, boundaries, and rigor, and the next generation. Yes, please. Yeah.
So Richard passed this to me when the teaching question came up. But I feel like I should ask Clara to answer this question because she's in my class at the moment. But the teaching, most of the teaching that I do is graduate, or all of it is graduate teaching. And I have the benefit as well of having a lot of experience in the classroom to work with, actually. So it's a slightly different answer maybe to the question that you were asking, because I think that's just typical of the classroom environments that I am embedded in. And that means that I can use that, and I try to use that experience as much as possible, because the nature of these systems issues, and this is what happens year after year. Every year I feel like I need to update part of what I'm teaching because things are happening so quickly. But I also have this, oh my God, like, you know, I should be doing things that are easier to repeat sometimes, but this is again the tension, right? In teaching, I think is similar to the tension in research. But I take the time to update examples, and I take the time to also bring people into the classroom who are doing this work on the front lines. So Kai is coming into my class on Monday to talk about some of the work of engaging and actually, you know, speaking about how to get things done in a way that I just don't think we can communicate in other ways, rather than just having people come into the classroom. So those are kind of some things that I do to try to bring kind of systems issues to life.
So back to the community you were talking about before. It takes a community to bring that into the classroom that you do. Yes, please, Jessica.
I'll talk about working across boundaries. I've been thinking, I think all researchers work across boundaries, whether whether you're speaking to your colleague, whether you're speaking to your parents, whether you're working in your home country. I think there's still a lot of boundary crossing that is involved, unless if you're working with yourself, then there's no boundaries there. And so working across boundaries requires that first you acknowledge that there's things you do not know, there's things you cannot do, and so acknowledging your limitations is quite important, but also trusting that there's other people out there who have the skills and the capacity to get you to where you want to go. And so relying on other people's skills and expertise and knowledge to contribute towards the common goal that you've identified, I think that's quite important. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this, Jessica. Richard, would you like to reflect on?
Just an observation on boundaries,
Yes.
just briefly. This came up yesterday. I thought it was interesting that I was at a talk at the LSE yesterday. One of the trustees of our organisation who set up the ISSB was there, and she was describing how it came about. And the thought that it triggers for me is how you can step. There's a series of steps to getting beyond boundaries, right? So, financial accounting is a very natural boundary. It's something belongs on a balance sheet or it doesn't, right? And if it doesn't, it's nothing to do with accounting. The step to create the ISSB was clearly stepping beyond that boundary, but remaining within the boundary of corporate reporting on the entity to its investors. But having made that step, it now becomes easier to make the next step to a different form of reporting, to add an incremental form of reporting. So there's something called the Global Reporting Initiative, which you're probably familiar with, the GRI, which is focused on reporting on impact. It's been around for a very long time. So that is much more sort of systemic oriented, arguably. We have a memorandum of understanding with GRI to work together with them in the interest of a broader system. And that would never have happened if the initial step to go beyond financial accounting hadn't happened.
Thank you very much. Tima, I will give you the last word here, as you are the one getting us together in this room again. So please, because I see time is running, and there's a lot of we could keep on, in this conversation for a long time, and we will in a moment. But I would like you to conclude here for the panel, please, Tima.
First of all, we will conclude with drinks outside, so we get to answer the hard questions outside, just so you know. But I'm going to answer your questions first, and then one final remark. I think that in strategy, first I want to say, it's so cool to have Bristol, Kings, and Liverpool here, right? That is amazing that we get this kind of draw. But the notion that strategy seeks to have answers and then tell people, managers, executives, what to do to make more money or for organizational performance, it's a false comfort that we give them. And so we do want simple answers. I think that's natural. But I think that having simple answers that are wrong is not the right way to go. And that's what we've done. And I'm going to credit Mark Durand for this. But he showed me a graph. And he says, basically, we start off with simplicity. And that's what we do in strategy. But, in strategy, we have simplicity only through rules of regression analysis or whatever it might be. But we have techniques that will give us this simple answers, and we know how to do that, but it's not necessarily simple, but we still do it. And then we have to get this level of complexity that becomes overwhelming, and that's when we stop. But what we're asking, I think, from a systems approach is to get to the other side when you have simplicity again, because you get so familiar with the data and the context that you see what you need to see. And what we haven't done is do that hard work to understand the methods to get us there. And a simple example is acupuncture. Acupuncture is something that's come through the centuries and works. It really does work. And yet science isn't able to explain how it works. And so if acupuncture has this validity to it, this that makes it work, then I think that there is a systems approach that we have to just do the hard work to get to that other side of simplicity that has validity to it. So that's how I would answer your questions, at least right now. And then I just want to say one more thing on the teaching side. I am giving a lecture on Tuesday for the Smith School. It's called the Adrian Fernando Lecture. And I am talking about where business schools have gone wrong. And so it's not necessarily a plug, because I think the fewer people that are there, maybe the better, because it's less nerve-wracking for me. But it's really, I think, a super important question about how we tackle this in business schools, because I don't think that we're doing justice for our students right now. And it's an artifact of history that we teach them how we teach them, but we can change that. And so I'm hoping that we can have that conversation on Tuesday.
And you're all welcome, by the way. Thank you so much, Tima, for being the occasion for us having this wonderful dialogue on the ground here today. And I will say thank you to the whole panel.